Thank you for staying with us. Now, according to the Tobacco Interference Index 2020, the tobacco industry in Nigeria has been interfering in tobacco control policies. Civil society organizations have now renewed calls for a speedy enforcement of the National Tobacco Control Act 2015 and the National Tobacco Control Regulations 2019. They also want the government to establish the Tobacco Control Fund to ensure the sustainability of tobacco control policies in the country. Well, joining me via Skype to discuss this is the Executive Director, Corporate Accountability and Public Participation Africa, Akimbode Oluwafemi. Good morning. Thank you for joining us on TVC Breakfast.
Good morning.
Now, there is a report your association came up with, if I may use the word, and it is titled The Big Tobacco Allies. Give us an insight into your findings of how the big tobacco organizations are seemingly interfering with the control policies, and tell us why it is important to have this conversation at this time.
Thank you very much. It is important to continue to speak about tobacco and its health impacts because yearly, according to WHO, 16,100 Nigerians die as a result of smoking. Tobacco is likely going to kill over 1 billion people this century. As you rightly said, we do have, the National Tobacco Control Act 2015 and the National Tobacco Control Regulation 2019. But what we have discovered is that despite those two regulations, the tobacco industry have continued to use underhand practices, what is called the crooked knife tactics, to be able to get into the room through the back door, through some so-called corporate social responsibility activities, trying to lobby our government officials and trying to use front groups where, to continue to be the megaphone of their own kind of ideas that will not allow for us to see the desired outcome of those two laws. And so what we've done is a wake-up call on government, on policymakers, on even public health advocates like us, that look, wait, we do have those two laws, but it is not over yet, but because the industry are changing their tactics, the industries are using different measures to begin to dilute, tobacco control policies, or in some cases to completely avoid them.
Now, does the National Tobacco Control Act not make provisions that limit these interactions between tobacco industry and the public? Are there no rooms for that?
So this is the point. We are very good at making laws, but a lot of the time we are not very good at enforcing the law. Sections 25, 27, and 28 of the National Tobacco Control Act speaks directly to issues like the interaction between tobacco companies and government. It speaks to conflict of interest. We are, in tobacco control, sitting on the table that your job is about tobacco control policies, that you cannot be seen to be dining and wining with the tobacco industry. It speaks about even gifts, collection of gifts. It speaks about MOUs and the kind of partnerships that a lot of states are now currently engaged in. So we find out that, yes, the law is there, but we have been able to see myriad of examples of how the tobacco companies undermine those laws. And of course, even government officials seems to flout the same law that the government promulgates.
So from what you have said now, enforcement is of major concern.
First is that we need to let the people know, we also need to let government know that some of these practices that seems innocuous, things like partnership with farmers, things like, you have particular tobacco companies that is involved in debating, literary and debating activities. There is a particular one that is trying to do partnership now with the arts industry. We need to let the public know the ultimate interest of the tobacco companies, which is to paint themselves in good light, which is to be able to use the back door to sit at the table, which is also to be able to use some of those front groups to be able to counter government when they want to impose very effective tobacco control laws. Like when the government wants to impose taxes, we've seen a lot of so-called think tank groups coming out to say, look, countering government agenda about raising taxes on tobacco control. So those are the points we're putting up. But most importantly is also we're now asking governments to put in place those policies, those guidelines within government agencies, within government institutions about limiting interactions with the tobacco industry, about being transparent about when it is highly important and necessary for the purposes of regulation, for the purposes of telling them that this is the law. You still need to call them to a meeting. There is a guideline, there is a provision in the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control, Article 5.3, that clearly states how governments around the world are supposed to conduct such interaction. And we are calling on the Nigerian government, more so at a period that we actually battling a pandemic, that there is a connection between mortality rates in COVID-19 and smoking rate, to the extent that even some governments around the world delisted tobacco from their essential list during the lockdown. So we expect the Nigerian government now to begin to take the necessary action for the enforcement of the tobacco control laws that we have in this country.
But what is the level of your organization's engagement with government with regards to this, pushing forward all of your findings?
Every platform, every forum, every opportunity that we do have, we do engage government. Take, for instance, I'm a member of the National Tobacco Control Committee, and we use that also to advance the need for us to move faster than we are currently doing. We are trying now to engage even other stakeholders. Like recently, we observed the upsurge of smoking in Nigerian Nollywood movies, and we're trying to engage stakeholders even within that particular industry to look at how we can
All right, we've been speaking with the Executive Director, Corporate Accountability and Public Participation Africa, Akimbode Oluwafemi, on the interference, as it is being said, of tobacco companies with civil society organization and the calls for speedy enforcement of the National Tobacco Control Act 2015 and the National Tobacco Control Regulation 2019. Well, he's back online now. I would like to hear more with what the level of engagement your organization is having with the government and the feedback you are getting from them.
At the federal and the state levels, in terms of how we can fast track the enforcement of the National Tobacco Control Law. We are also engaged different government agencies. We are engaging the FCC, the federal, the former CPC, in terms of looking at this as a consumer issue. We are, trying to engage other agencies like NAFDAC. Every agency of government that has to do with the education sector. We did a report about how tobacco is being sold near schools in Nigeria. We are also currently, as I said earlier, engaging people from the movies and entertainment industry because of the upsurge of smoking in Nigerian movies and in Nigerian music videos. We will continue to engage every relevant stakeholder to ensure that we do see drastic reduction.
But what feedback are you getting from all of the stakeholders, especially the government, with regards to, from your engagement, what feedback are you getting? Are you getting that body language that says we are going ahead to implement these acts to ensure that the safety of the people and reduction in tobacco consumption is something we achieve in a possible, as quickly as possible, rather?
So let me be very clear about this. Our engagement with the federal Ministry of Health, for instance, has been very fruitful. Outcomes of which are those two laws. And then we do recently have the inauguration of the second National Tobacco Control Committee, which is a bold step. There are issues that they have raised, issues like funding and the rest of them. We as CSOs will continue to see how we can assist to get them the necessary resources to be able to do their work. But having said that, it's also what we call the Tower of Babel, from the same government. While the Ministry of Health wants to move faster on tobacco control, we've seen agencies of government that are also doing business with the tobacco industry. We think that ought to stop because that in itself will not enable us to achieve our desired goal at the period and at the rate at which we quickly want to achieve those periods. So we are using, like the champion agency like the Ministry of Health to be able to assess other agencies of government that think that, tobacco is just like every other business, to let them see that, look, Nigeria is losing a lot as a result of its health and diseases caused by this particular product.
Now, how were you able to come up with all of the information, the findings in this report? Because I'm certain a lot of our viewers would be interested in knowing.
You see, sometimes you just look at the tobacco industry, there seems to be like lots of themselves in Nigeria. A lot of materials we collected were actually from their own websites, from their own digital media posts and the rest of them. But of course, we had one-on-one interviews with people, we spoke with people on the streets. We also did a lot of field work. And then we subjected them to some scientific verification. And we were able to put up this document that shows clearly that there is an orchestrated activities by the tobacco industry, particularly the two biggest tobacco companies in Nigeria, British American Tobacco and Philip Morris International, to undermine national tobacco control laws in Nigeria.
Now, moving forward now will be recommendations for the government to act on to ensure that the Act, the National Tobacco Control Regulations Act and National Tobacco Control Act of 2015, all of the recommendations there are also brought to fore. What are the recommendations, rather, in this report put together by your organization? And how would you want the government to act on that?
So moving forward is that the Nigerian government should enforce the provision of the FCTC Article 5.3 and the provisions of the National Tobacco Control Act 2015, particularly sections 25, 26, 27, and 28. Those clearly states how the tobacco industry will not be able to use their enormous wealth, their enormous influence to undermine public health policies in Nigeria. The government should be very emphatic about the fact that we have signed an international treaty that forbids us going, as a state, into partnership with the tobacco industry. And that we should do everything possible to insulate tobacco control measures from their proxies, from their PR agents, and every other tactics that they want to use to undermine the law. But most importantly is that adequate resources should be should be channeled to the Ministry of Health that is championing this cause to be able to do that work. And that's why we are asking the government to create the National Tobacco Control Fund as provided for by the law, by the same National Tobacco Control Act 2015, and as well increase taxes so that the government will be able to have enough revenue to be able to protect the lives of the Nigerian citizens from the tobacco industry.
Now, but as it is, we know what the situation is when it comes to the economy and revenue generation. We are in a pandemic and we have seen the devastating effect on the economy.
Thank you very much. So, tobacco kills, tobacco causes ill health. As of today, tobacco is a culprit in the rates of mortality relating to the same pandemic. So when you know that a problem is part of the pandemic, what do? You try to reduce the impact of that particular problem in fueling the pandemic. And so that's why we're calling on the Nigerian government to put in place those measures. And when you increase taxes, it is a double win for the government. You are going to raise your revenue. You also going to reduce it at the number of Nigerians that are dying as a result of smoking. This is the more reason why we think the government should act now by raising taxes. The economy is down. There is taxes on almost everything that is wholesome that we use, but the tobacco taxes almost remain the same. This is the question that the Nigerian government needs to answer.
Right. Now, one of the things you mentioned is the collaboration and the fact that some of these tobacco companies are funding some projects. And some persons will say perhaps this is via CSR. Are we also saying that perhaps they shouldn't go ahead with carrying out the CSRs again in the country?
I used to use one analogy when I was younger, that if you are a man, you are a father in a house, and you have a wife and 3 children, and a rich man says, look, I'm going to take away your wife and your 3 children and then give you some wealth. I doubt a typical Nigerian will agree to that. Tobacco is killing people in their thousands and in their millions, and they provide pockets and pockets of what they call economy. The World Bank has come out with reports after reports that when you weigh the public health risk of smoking globally and other costs that they inflict on the society, on public health, on the environment, that those costs far outweighs those costs. What the tobacco industry needs to do first, before they can even do CSR, if they can, is to pay for those costs. And it's important to say that there is no amount of money that can actually pay for a man's life, that can pay for the kind of ill health that the tobacco companies do. I told you earlier that 16,100 deaths in this country every year is attributed to smoking. How do we pay for that? This is the problem. This is the question that we need to always remind or find answers to. And that the answer is not the continued proliferation of smoking, rising smoking rate as we're currently seeing in the country. And let me just add this, that also, it's also been proven that smoking is gateway to drug, and that a lot of those violence that we've seen in Nigeria recently are attributed to people that are taking one drug or the other. And we're currently in a pandemic of violence acts. And so we need to be serious on the issue of tobacco. I do ask people, why is a pack of cigarettes selling for 6-7 pounds in UK and is selling for 150, 200 naira in Nigeria?
Very, very pertinent question. Now, with this report now, aside engaging the government, how are you going to ensure that the public, those are the grassroots, everyone across the board, get to understand the import of this report?
So, very important. We also publishing this report so that the tobacco industry know that we are monitoring them, so that they will know that we know, and so that they will know that at some point they will be called to account for the infractions of our law. We are doing this also to educate the Nigerian people that when you see a so-called debate by some amorphous, organizations, we need to ask ourselves questions, because a lot of us don't want our kids to smoke, also want our kids to be associated with tobacco products. We're publishing this also for the government to know that when we do get some of these advices from these think tanks, they are just not ordinary think tanks, but think tanks and researchers that are funded by the tobacco industry, and they need to be wary. But most importantly is what we have said, that the government itself needs to act and enforce the law that will insulate our public health policy from the tobacco industry. But I must also say this, that even the tobacco industry, it's also trying to, approach even the public health community. So we are also using this to alert them as public health advocates to be able to wary of the kind of people that they begin to associate with.
All right. Executive Director, Corporate Accountability and Public Participation Africa, Akimbode Oluwafemi. Thank you for your time on the program.
Thank you so much.